All right. Well, hi everyone. Thanks for coming to our diversity data and hiring webinar. It's a very important topic to keep top of mind and to continue to press forward in our efforts to create a more diverse and equitable workforce, as well as kind of change the way our enterprises operate and really focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Most of you may have seen a poll we launched. Hopefully you've gotten a chance to answer, really just talking about where you feel like your company's maturity is as it relates to diversity programs. That'll definitely be relevant as we get into our discussions. But wanted to first introduce everybody. We've got an all-star panel to help walk us down the path. We have Ron Storn, the CPO at Booster Fuels, Jen Oswalt, head of HR at Good Time, and Dean Del Peach, Director of Talent and Diversity at Fix Software. So I'm sure we're all going to get a lot of really meaningful and actionable insights out of this. If you see me looking down a lot, it's because I'm taking notes and just here to keep the conversation flowing and, like everybody else, learn from our three experts. And we really appreciate you all being here. To kick things off, just to kind of set the table, one of our customers, Glassdoor, recently published a study, and it came back with really conclusive findings, two of which were 67% of active candidates are actively seeking out diverse companies. On the flip side of that, 50% of existing employees believe their companies need to improve diversity among their internal workforces. So as it relates to not just hiring, but kind of retention, workforce management, and optimization, this is really an important thing, making sure that we have not just diversity supporting or allyship type statements, but real programs in place that kind of emphasize that important and lead to meaningful action. So as we kind of kick things off, how do you feel about the diversity programs in your own spaces? Are they mature? What do they look like? Jen, what's your take on that? Where does Good Time stand?
Yeah, so in Good Time, we're a Series A startup. So I would say we are in the beginning phases of really building out a robust program. And really, I think looking at, like, what do we want our program to be? And when I say what do we want, meaning what does our employee base, our teammates, what are they looking for in? Because I think, like, diversity, inclusion, equity, and belonging, it's all part of, like, your culture too. So I see them being really tied together, but we're in our beginning phases, so not sure where anybody else is at, but that's us.
Yeah, I mean, here at Booster, we're a Series C company, and we're still developing. We're a little bit more mature than Good Times, but I think the strategy is very important into how do you weave that through everything that you do, because a lot of everyone's focused on diversity, but I think inclusivity is the key. You have to develop an inclusive mindset throughout the company, and especially at the leadership level, because if you're inclusive, what that means is that you're going to welcome all different types of backgrounds, ideas, thoughts, and voices to the table. And you have to reinforce that every day through, how do you make decisions? Do you think of it from an inclusive standpoint? And we're doing a decent job of that, but it's a long journey. We're right on the, I would say, lap 2 of this journey, but there's a lot of cool things that we're starting to build in. I think having individuals and employees have a voice into what is happening in the company is important. And what we try to do at all of our town hall, our team meetings, is really highlight people that are doing well from an inclusive standpoint and a value standpoint. And when you share in people that are doing well, then it encourages others to want to step up and be inclusive and be thoughtful from a diverse standpoint as well too. And so that's enough what I can say now, but then we can definitely go deeper as we continue on with the webinar.
How about you, Dean?
Yeah, it's so interesting. I think we have an all-star lineup of different phases. So fixed software specifically, so my role, I'm accountable for diversity strategy there. Our journey has been about 4 years, and we were a Series C, but we're acquired in December. So it was a great day for us
Yeah,
stockholders.
congratulations.
But yes,
Yeah.
but in terms of our journey, I mean, what we did is we became a certified B Corp organization first. And that held us to accountability standards that we had to report on. Because I think one of the key things in terms of, strategy is there's two ways of looking at it. You're either going to have a strategy that is on the side of the desk, or you're going to have a strategy that's going to integrate into the whole entire business and have data to support it. And so for us, that's kind of where we started our journey. And then what we did is, we created an actual strategy and framework, and we took different areas that supported the topics diversity, inclusion, belonging, and equity. And so, for example, when we look at diversity, we look at recruitment, we look at our partnerships, we look at how our self-identification numbers. When we look at inclusion, we look at our training and education areas, inclusivity surveys. We look at how people integrate into our culture. When we look at belonging, we look at engagement and how people are feeling supported. And then when we look at equity, we look at compensation data, career development, succession planning. And so these are kind of the areas that, fill out our actual strategy. And then every year we have actual numbers we report on. And so, number one, we're reporting to B Corp. Number two, on the Fix website, there's an impact page where we're reporting externally to the broader community, so people know this is who we are. And then number three, I've got internal metrics I report on a quarterly basis, right, to really, really make sure that we're targeting. So it's been a journey for us. And to really, really kind of have a robust strategy, and we're still on the journey. We're still working and tweaking, and that's kind of where we're at.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting just seeing the poll results. I'm not sure if everybody caught them as they popped up, but more than 90 or almost 90% of respondents to the poll say their companies are either at the progressing stage, very basic program, or not even out of the starting gate yet. So I think this is going to really be helpful to a lot of folks. And that's one of those interesting things, right? It's all about perspective. Our program may be better than we think it is, but because, I mean, to your point, Dean, in sharing the data and exposing it, you're owning it and, being accountable to it. And that, I think, means a lot to the employees as well as the prospective candidates, because ultimately that's what you want, right? Is to retain, a diverse workforce, which we all know will lead to better performance, better decisions, more innovation. But then full circle comes back to attracting not just the best candidates, but a diverse pool of candidates. But one thing you all mentioned is employee involvement, not just, as a beneficiary of a diversity, equity, and inclusion program, but also in kind of the conceptualization and planning of that model. How do you guys integrate your employees into the process?
Well, I'll give you a recent example. I mean, with the Juneteenth situation that occurring a couple of weeks ago. So Booster is a hybrid company where there is field workers. It's a big component of the organization, and we have to actually continue to work to meet the needs of our customers. But what we wanted to do is celebrate Juneteenth in a different way, since we couldn't give the day off to everyone. So we enlisted our committee. We call it a back group, but basically it's everyone has a lot of employee resource groups. It's our version of what that is. And we wanted to really generate some ideas from that team, as well as people from all across the organization. And what we came up with is that we voted in an all hands meeting about different charities that are representing Juneteenth that we could actually invest in and give a donation to. And we also talked about in this meeting about what it means for the holiday of Juneteenth. What was the background? What was the resonation for this evolution that came to light? And also what was important was just having this conversation, making sure that we talked about it and not just let the moment go by. I sent a note out to the whole company and received a lot of feedback saying it's refreshing that we have this perspective and that we really want to recognize it and bringing everyone into the conversation. So I think that's the way of bringing employees in. Juneteenth was one example, but I think in all cases, if you listen to all of your employees, doesn't mean you're always going to be aligned with them, but getting their feedback and that they have a voice is the biggest concern of employees. So that is a good start in developing this great relationship with all of your employees.
Awesome. How do you do it, Dean? How does Fix kind of bring the employees into the process at the beginning?
Yeah, for us, what's been really important is really understanding who our employees are from an identity perspective. And so self-identification has been extremely important for us. And that helped us to recognize who's in our organization.
Yeah.
And then also helped us to recognize who needs to be here as well. And so through self-identification, it helped us to really understand, okay, what cultural celebrations are we going to celebrate? When it comes to different holidays that may wrap around religious perspectives, what's important to us because that's important to our employee base. And so these are some things that help to inform us of what's really important to our employees. And then as we started to kind of celebrate through, our similar to kind of Ron's, message of, celebrating Juneteenth, as we start to celebrate through our diversity calendar, so to speak, one of the things that we really started to do is education and training. So it wasn't really about celebrating. It was about, okay, why do people celebrate these events? I'll give you a perfect example, Ramadan, right? Giving people understanding about what Ramadan's really about. Why is that important for our Muslim colleagues, and what are some things that we should understand about during this time? And so we really start to wrap education. And so something that we do internally is we have a tool that we use. It's called Crescendo, and Crescendo gives us articles and videos on a regular cadence to every single employee around diversity and inclusion. It's connected to our Slack. And what we've done is attached to that is every month we have a session called Crescendo Conversations, where we meet as a company, right? And we talk about, stereotyping. What does white privilege really mean? Talk to me about pride. When anti-Asian discrimination is happening. And what's happened is it starts to involve all the employees around awareness and education and understanding, hey, this is what other employees are going through, right? And so those are some of the aspects. There's more, but those are some of the aspects that we've done to really start to galvanize and understand, what do our employees think, and how do we give them more greater information?
Yeah, that's wonderful. And really what I'm hearing too is kind of there's a human element to it. We're going to dovetail into a conversation about data, KPI, and analytics, but there's the qualitative element too, that human connection that's extremely important. Research isn't only about ones and zeros and surveys, and in a worst case scenario surveilling. I mean, there's got to be that human touch and make sure everybody has a voice and a seat at the table. That's awesome to hear. As we do dovetail though into, again, more of a technical data conversation, it doesn't have to be technical modeling or coding or anything like that. But I mean, it is important that measurement piece, right, is really the first step towards accountability and really understanding if there is a problem, how big is the problem, and where are the first areas we may need to tackle. To that end, Jen, what metrics or analysis, right, how do you think about success as it relates to your diversity, equity, and inclusion program?
Yeah, I think we look at it there's a lot of different measures of success. So your employee net promoter score is one of the indicators, and then we've been doing what I call like a listening strategy. So having discussions, maybe a little less formal than Dean's strategy that he put together, but seems like it's very similar in how do we have discussions around what's happening, in our world and in our culture, and And then how do we collect data on people's thoughts about that?
Yeah.
So having topics that we talk about, and then surveying people on, like, how did we do? Were you wanting more? Where were we great? Where did we miss the mark? And a lot of that is focused just around our culture at this point. But similarly, in the metrics side is, we have our first HRIS that we just implemented a couple months ago, and an ATS. So collecting that data and able to give the first readout on, here's the data that we have, and so here's what we look like, and here's our first step to be really like best in class. So I think defining what your organization wants from a metrics perspective. Do you want to be similar to the US average? Do you want to be similar to your headquarters average? As you look at like very specific things, and then, defining what is an inclusive culture, what is a culture of belonging. So I think there's qualitative and quantitative data that you have to get.
Absolutely. Ron, how does, Booster think about it?
I mean, similar to what Jen said, definitely you want to have some listening and surveys and things of that nature. But I think from a holistic standpoint, you want to take a look at how is the company operating, and are they putting their money where their mouth is? So, for instance, we recently had our performance cycle, and so we wanted to get metrics and analysis on, what was the percentage of women and underrepresented minorities that received certain scores, and the promotion rates. And also when you have salary increases or promotion increases, what was the percentage compared to other demographics within the organization? I think you have to look at that all together. And then what does that story tell? And if it tells a story where, something seems off, then you have to explore it. In part of my previous companies that I worked at, there was a scenario in one situation where we were located in Nashville, and it was basically a customer service organization, but it seemed like all white individuals, male and female, got higher raises, got promoted, and the African American individuals were good from a metrics standpoint, but they didn't go the extra mile according to the managers in that organization, and did not receive the same type of efforts. So we took that data, explored it, and we kind of reversed the whole performance indication, saying that there was bias in the process. So that's just one example. When you look at the stats, it can tell you how the organization is performing, and but the key is getting the information, and employees want to see you take action on it, and also be transparent about what's happening in the organization. So at that company, we were very transparent and talked about, this is the findings that we had, this is what we're doing about it. And I think people appreciate that, walking through that whole process. But it all starts with data and going deep on, cutting that data in a lot of different ways. And DE&I is a big portion of that. But I think most companies, it's really critical that they that they have a baseline, that they assess where they're at initially when they start these types of metrics, and then look at the growth or the lack of growth during the right cadence, and then taking action on that.
Yeah, that's awesome. Awesome.
Yeah, if I could jump in, Chris, because it's so interesting how Jen kind of talked about more inclusion metrics, and then Ron talks about performance metrics. So maybe I'll take recruitment metrics and talk about how that flows. Maybe just one point. I know Molly had asked a question in the chat. I'll answer that maybe later on if we have time for Q&A. But in regards to what we track from a recruitment perspective, there's a bunch of different things. So number one, I'm looking at the effect of our job descriptions So on our job descriptions, for example, we have an equity statement, and that basically encourages people from all walks of life to apply. So one of the things that I'm doing is I'm tracking that equity statement to see how well, to find out if people are applying based upon that equity statement. There's research that basically says that, women will apply to only to jobs when they have 90 to 100% of the qualifications. Men will apply when they have 60 to 70%. So I need to understand who's coming into my pipeline, right? And so we created that equity statement to understand is that statement encouraging women? And so we have data on that, for example. We have data on the applicants coming into our pipeline. So I actually know for every single job, the actual identity characteristics for every applicant coming into my roles. And on average, we're tracking at about 92% of candidates filling out that actual identity survey. So whenever someone applies, they get a pop-up that says, hey, we'd love for you to fill out this survey, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And they will fill it out, and that's how we get that metric. So I know, for example, if I have a software developer position that is traditionally, from a gender perspective, it's more male identified, and I'm only getting, like, say, 10% of females coming into my pipeline, I know I got to tweak my job description, or I got to go back out from a sourcing perspective. So that's the type of data that we're collecting there. And then after we have, we're tracking. And so I think Priyanka asked what recruitment tool we use. We use Lever. And the reason why we use Lever is because in previous ATSs that we've used, it wasn't able to do all the stuff that we really need to do from a diversity perspective. And what I found is Lever has really, really supported not just our recruitment initiatives, but all of our diversity initiatives, right? So the surveys actually created Lever, et cetera. Maybe one more point. One thing that we also do is we do structured interviews, and we have very specific questions in the interview process that have an actual grade, right? And have a marking system. And how we use that to reduce bias is at the end of a process, if we've got 4 candidates, right? At the end of a process, each one has a score assigned to them. So let's say, for example, Tanisha scores 10 out of 10 on her interview process, and John scores 8 out of 10 on his interview process. Well, let's say the hiring manager says, well, we want to hire John. Well, what I do now is I'm taking my recruiters from being recruiters into talent advisors, where they could now go to those hiring managers and say, hiring manager, hold on a minute, that makes no sense. Tanisha scored 10 out of 10. Why are you hiring John? Oh, we had a gut feeling John might be better. He might be a better fit. Well, listen, you might think John's a better fit, but I think Tanisha's a better culture add and contributor to our department. So now we can have real conversation based on data. So those are some actual points that we actually do collect in the recruitment process around data. There's more, but those are some of the points.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I mean, continuing the conversation around recruitment specifically, talent acquisition functions are typically held to legacy metrics, right? And they're really centered around things like quota attainment, cost per hire, and time to fill. But they don't necessarily account for the value contribution that the new hires that they're bringing in are making to the overall enterprise. And what that tends to lead to is this kind of assumption in a lot of enterprises that recruitment, talent acquisition, and even HR to a point is a cost center as opposed to a revenue driver. And there's more advanced analytics out there. Crosscheck itself has developed a quality of hire, analysis and model that really marries kind of the pre-hire candidate data with the employee data, spools that up and helps identify opportunities to optimize diverse hiring programs, as well as, again, to associate a specific business value with those hires. Is that something you all are considering, or is that the type of analysis you are looking to do, or is it just something that's a bit out of reach? One of the other things, that we tend to find talking with HR and TA folks all day, every day, is the lack of internal resources when it comes from a shared analytics function, right? HR is typically a little lower on the food chain. It's, customer and sales and marketing, and then maybe it gets to kind of the people element. Do you think about kind of advanced analytics, machine learnings, AI, quality of hire? And then what does that mean as it relates to kind of the support you get from the organization?
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head, because for me, I mean, data is the key to all decision making, and you really have to understand, you know, how to use the data and sell the data to your employees. But the way that I always try to structure my teams is, first of all, HR needs to be strategic. If you think about it, every decision a company makes, there's a financial component and a people component. So if you're not measuring that data about people, then you're falling behind. And most CEOs, especially in startup organizations, want to understand why you're making a decision or why you're requesting a certain thing. So having the data is crucial. So I like to build like a data scientist team within the people org. We don't have that here yet at Booster, but that's something I'm going to be implementing. But like what you were saying is the metrics you're talking about, the quality of hire, that's critical, because the TA function, you could bring them in, but 6 months later, if you have to replace them, then that's another investment that you train the individuals, then you have to go retrain the folks. If you can have data that can point back to, okay, here's our superstar 6 months into the company, who was on that interview panel? What were the types of questions that were asked? I mean, what's that person's background? That's like the holy grail. And you want things that are unbiased. So things like cross-check so we've implemented cross-check. And, you know, when you do the referencing for some of these candidates, you know, having it be very intuitive, that it's very free form. It really helps get a full picture of the candidate that you're trying to hire. And that can also help you generate leads of new candidates that, you know, would also be a match based off of the skills and the values that you're looking for. So I mean, I think that the analytic elements is so crucial to understand and do that. We use Greenhouse. I've also used Lever. Both of them are really good at really making it easy to assess, you know, the pipelines, the funnels, what works, what doesn't work. And I think those types of tools are going to go a long way, and cross-check is in that ballpark in terms of being very strategic and reducing the bias involved in all the hiring aspects that we're a part of.
Yeah. What are your thoughts, Jen and Dean?
Yeah, I can jump in if Dean, then you want to go next. So I think agree with everything that Ron said, and believe like that's our ultimate goal as well, is to measure against, you know, how people are doing overall. We're not quite that evolved yet, but one thing that we are pretty darn good at is the front end. And so we also use Greenhouse, but I've used Lever before, love Lever also, great tools for measuring, you know, who's coming into your system, how they get there. And then the Good Time tool, the thing that it really empowers talent teams to do is that diverse candidate experience. So we can measure in our tool who was on that interview panel. It's really easy to get to that data. You set up like AI tags. So if you want to see, you know, a female engineer as part of your hiring process, you know, you can do that very easily. And then you can measure your results of how many diverse hires came through the system. You can also make sure that your diverse interviewers don't have interviewing fatigue, so it can rotate, you know, through your interviewers also, which is usually pretty helpful. And then it allows you also to track that. So our system with the ATS, I feel like is like the 1-2 power punch.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as we think about data, it goes beyond analytics, especially as it relates to kind of some of the newer technologies that are out on the market that are kind of making decisions for us, specifically kind of artificial intelligence, whether that's sourcing candidates or whether that's deciding who should get promoted and, you know, maybe at what scale their rate of pay should grow, from a compensation perspective. Do you feel, Dean, that AI has a place in kind of making some of those decisions, or do you feel like the data should be interpreted and then actioned upon by humans, or is there a balance?
I think as of right now, that AI needs to be coupled with human intervention when we're talking about diversity and recruitment intersecting. And you know, there's been studies, there's been articles that are out there that talk to you about, you know, different AI tools screening out Black candidates, etc. You know, there's a good movie, Coded Bias, if no one's seen it, on Netflix, particularly, that really deals with this. I think AI has a place. I think AI, machine learning, and the collection of data has a place, but it's not at the place based upon the design, right? And who designed it. And because of that, that is why you get bias in the system. That's just a reality, right?
Right.
But I think it has a place. I think it needs, as I said, human intervention. And I think it needs human intervention from people who understand what their own unconscious bias is and their biases in general. And then we can use that tool, right? And I always say this, I think data is fantastic, data is great, but we can't remember we're dealing with human beings,
Right?
like we cannot forget that, right? We're dealing with humans, and so they're not robots, right? We're dealing with humans, and we have to always remember there has to be a human element somewhere in what we're using these tools for.
Yeah.
Mm.
Well, speaking of tooling, I mean, there was an interesting stat that SHRM published just a few months ago on the growth, and it is exponential growth to the tune of 170% year-over-year increase in software and service sales as it relates to diversity and inclusion and anti-bias software. Have you all partook in that massive kind of buying spree? Do you believe that a lot of these softwares out there actually do what they say? Have you seen any success?
Yeah, I'll start first. I think over the last year, no, only because we've been on the journey for a little while, so we've purchased different tools. I kind of mentioned one, Crescendo. But something that's interesting. I feel like it's more than just purchasing software that's directed toward diversity. And I find that a lot of software is around recruitment. So like AI tools to remove names, et cetera, et cetera. I think what people need to know is how to understand how to use the tools that they have to get the data.
Right.
Because the truth is that I know how to get diversity data out of Salesforce. I know how to get diversity data out of my HRIS. I know how to get diversity data out of my ATS, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that's where people need education. What do you look for, and how do you actually create the right integrations, right? I think what the world is looking for is really a tool that can give a macro view that integrates with all of these things versus just ad hoc things around. So my thoughts are in learning about Good Times tool and learning about Crosscheck's tool. I think they do fantastic things with regards to the areas that they specialize on. And I think what we need to do is understand, how do we take these tools now and get the data, extract them to what we really need to see and complement, right? So sorry if that was long-winded, but yeah, that's kind of my thoughts around it, right?
We're thinking the exact same way at Crosscheck. Again, going back to the analytics tool, again, when people think of Crosscheck, most people think about automated reference checking and organic talent sourcing. And I'm not here to sell our product today, but the reason we built the analytics package is for exactly what you said. There are just so many disparate data sources. The data is fragmented, whether it's within assessments, within the ATS, pre-hire, post-hire. And until you get a good handle on that and a single source of truth, it becomes hard to actually trust the data, and you're left trusting your gut. And a lot of companies, whether they're Series A or seed companies, or well-established brands, we're all suffering from that same ill. I mean, Ron, have you bought into kind of any diversity platforms or diversity, pieces of software? Or,
No, I mean,
or are you kind of the mindset that Dean and I are of, which is kind of, let's just, consolidate and learn how to use the data we got?
no, I'm more in the camp of you and Dean, because I think he articulated very well. I mean, there's so many tools out there. You don't know if they're going to work or not, or you don't know the underlying thesis of how they're getting the data and so forth. So it's been very difficult to figure that out. But there are a number of tools out there. The only one that I've heard of that a lot of my peers who I respect is using is Matheson to help with diversity hiring. I don't know if people on this call have used it as well, but it seems to be one that a lot of people are taking the stab at, because they seem to produce some decent results. I think one of the key things that is important to have is benchmarking as well in a lot of these tools, because a lot of times people want to know how they're doing. Not only, I mean, you could hire 2 or 3 people, but what does that mean, right? What is a benchmarking with other companies, other peers? So if you have a tool that can figure that out, I think it's going to help you, because everyone always thinks you could do better, which you probably can, but you're trying a lot of different things, but there's no touch point to see where you are at your stage of company compared to relative other companies at your stage too. And so I think we beat ourselves up a lot. I think the whole key on all this stuff with data or no data, you need to be intentional. Do you want to improve? Are you listening to your employees? Are you trying to develop programs that can do better? Because almost all people, they want to work with smart, diverse individuals. They want to have an impact in their role, and they want to be at a company that's mission oriented. And being intentional to be inclusive is going to win the day. Kind of the phrase I always use is like, it's like a dance. If you get invited to a dance, that means you get hired into a company, but then at the dance, no one asks you to dance, you feel excluded, right? So the inclusivity piece is so crucial to start with and be that intentional, and then everything else will fall out.
Yeah. What's your take, Jen?
Yeah, similar. I think, our approach at Good Time is also like, let's make sure we're good at one thing, at a time, as we go through like our journey on what our diversity DE&I program is. So that's like understanding your applicant data, right? To me, that's a little bit of the step one. And then, add in the interview data, look at, current employees, and then, start benchmarking, setting those goals. So similar to what both Dean and Ron said, in developing your strategy. I don't think a tool doesn't solve the problem, right? A tool is just like another piece of data introduced into the process. So if you're not good at the front end, that tool isn't going to make a difference in the end.
Right. And I mean, circling all the way back, to our initial conversation around, kind of where we are individually as companies, in kind of our progress in developing those strategies and programs. Do you feel like it has to come from the top down, or is this something where change can be kind of instigated and initiated through a groundswell up? Do you get the support at the top, or is it something that you feel like you have to sell in?
I mean, I don't think there's one size fits all, right, for different companies, but I think ultimately you have to have buy-in from both, right? You have to have buy-in from the top, and you have to have, the people help initiate it across all organizations. So I think if you do it, the fact that employees have to rise up and convince a CEO or leadership team that change has to happen, I think that says something as well too. So I think it's a balanced view, but again, every company is at a different stage.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think every company is different in terms of their philosophy around this. But a lot of the change really has been grassroots, from like, you just look over the last year, right? George Floyd gets murdered. everybody's in an uproar. CEOs are like, where's my diversity data? What's going on in my company? What's happening? Blah, 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 right? So a lot of these things may happen grassroots, but eventually, executives have to buy into it, right? Or else there's no, or else you won't get the traction and the movement and the money behind it that you really, really want to see. My only thought to this is, I think a lot of times we think executive buy-in is like a one-day process.
Mm-hmm.
And we think it's like this meeting that happens on like July 15th. It's going to be executive buy-in day, right? And I think that's the incorrect approach. I don't think we need to think like that. I think it took about 2.5 years for our CEO over time to really buy in, to understand that, hey, my executive team is mainly white men. I cannot continue to do this. I've got to make sure there's greater diversity among the team. Right. So that took time. And that's just reality, and it's okay, right? As long as people understand that this is not a set time period, it's a journey, right? And I think that's really, really, really what's key.
Yeah, absolutely. And you pick up wins on the way, and it's just a compounding effect, right? I think about the program that we want to put in place, and it kind of starts with just a general compliance thing, right? Like a CYA, make sure you're doing the table stakes. Then there's awareness and buy-in across the enterprise, and that leads to being an employer of choice and retention, which then leads to kind of building out a diverse candidate pipeline, right? Which compounds that effect. And then of course you get the organizational benefits of increased performance and all those things. And then of course that opens up new markets to you because you have a diverse workforce, which also leads to greater top line. And ultimately, we want to get those wins, but the wins really happen at a personal level, right? Like you treat employees well, they're going to be happy. They're going to just feel better about coming into work every day and contributing because they know their company has their back. Do you have any success stories you can share? Whether it's at a macro level or an individual employee story? I think people would love to just kind of hear again, what does success look like?
Can I start first?
Of course.
That's okay. Yeah, I've got a couple of really, really great ones. I'll share one though. So about 4 years ago, our sales and revenue team was basically was male dominated. Actually, absolutely no woman on the team. And eventually we hired, our first female identified sales rep, and she was instrumental in referring, female candidates into our organization, which is fantastic. And so she referred, a previous colleague that she worked with. That person actually has become, over the last 3 years, our top sales rep, right? Which has opened the door for many more female identified candidates in not just individual contributor roles, but also in regards to managerial roles. I just literally put out another offer for another female identified individual who got a promotion into our whole sales team, changing the whole dynamic from that quote unquote bro culture, right, into a more integrated strategy. And it was easy to talk about, hey, we need to really, really put more effort into ensuring there's let's say we're using the identity characteristics of gender, more gender balance, because we see the result of that, right? And it was so interesting, Chris, I kid you not, and also Ron and Jen, it was so interesting. When they say that, for example, they people make these biased comments like about women that could seem really, really negative, almost as if they are not strong performers. Well, let me tell you something, and let me give the world some notice on this. See this one individual who's our top performer. By October, she had already crushed her year, and then you know what she did? She went on mat leave and said goodbye for 6 months. That's awesome. That's the stories that you want, right? Don't tell me that you can't have successful women in sales who can really drive numbers. She killed her numbers and then went on mat leave and walked out the door. So that's awesome. And that's
the ultimate mic drop.
Right. And so that's why I'm saying, like, when we talk about this conversation around diversity, it's not just a McKinsey study. This is reality when you really see it in progress. And I think it's awesome.
Absolutely, absolutely. Jen, what do you got for us?
Well, that's a hard act to follow, right?
Yeah.
I think one thing that is cool and part of why I joined Good Time is we have a female Asian CEO, and I've never worked for with or for a female CEO before, and our like strategy team, our leadership team is currently 50% female. So we have a female sales leader. So Dean, speaking to the mic drop, you know, she is rallying the sales team in ways I've never seen it. And the other day, her baby had gum surgery, and we're in a meeting, and she's like, "Hey, just have to tell you, if she wakes up, I'm just gonna have to go." And we're having a record quarter, and so baby wakes up, she's like, "I have to go now." And you know, and so I think it's just so incredible to see that ability to manage that. I think it's been a very tough time for everyone in balancing just work and life. But to see those female leaders crushing it is pretty awesome.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think it speaks exactly to your point earlier about culture, and also things coming from the tops down. You know, don't just talk the talk, but walk the walk. And you know, it's just great to hear. Ron, two tough acts to follow.
Yeah, it is. I mean, unfortunately, I have a similar story in terms of you know, gender and leadership. But yeah, I just recently joined Booster. The CEO and I first met when I was at Lyft, and he was starting the company. And what he loved what Lyft was doing and the culture that I helped build in terms of being so different from our competitor Uber, and really, you know, being a friend in the car, and really, you know, making that the mindset for the whole company, and making sure that we, you know, understand and welcome all types of backgrounds. And so when I was talking about joining him, he reached at my last job, when I left my last job, he reached out and said, "Hey, I really need you. We have some diversity issues. Our leadership team is not diverse. I know you've helped build a diverse organization in your previous companies. How can you help?" And so one of the first things I said is that the fact that you're open to it and you care about it and you want to do it is a first step. And what we introduced for a couple of leadership roles is that not only do you have to have diverse candidates in the pipeline, you need to have one gender and one underrepresented minority in the final slate of candidates. And not just, you know, some of the more easier ones to do that. Everyone thinks that, you know, HR, legal, and marketing are easy areas to get gender and underrepresented diversity, but, you know, just think about it for all areas. And so in a short period of time, we actually hired 2 women, one in legal and one in ops. And we are a very ops intensive organization. And you don't think of women leaders in that role, but she's a badass. She's actually going to really help us accelerate how we grow, not only in markets, but just our thinking and our approach to it. And again, when you make hires like that, you recognize, well, why weren't we doing this earlier too? Because having these different backgrounds and their different approaches is going to make you better. If you have all like-minded individuals in the company, you're only going to think a certain way, and you're never going to have the innovation and the growth that's going to make you a very, very successful company. So that's my story.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful. And I think we should end on a high note. I mean, representation counts, and taking that first step is hard, right? But once you take it, you just get the ball rolling. You can't kick this can down the road, right? You've got to make the jump. That's just great to hear. Wonderful. I know that the audience is really loving these like I say, success stories, because again, you put in the effort, you put in the time, you make a real commitment, and this is what you get out of it. And that's real world wins. I mean, and that's our goal as HR people, TA leaders, is to level the playing field, and like I say, just make it an equitable and inclusive, you know, workforce for everyone. So really appreciate it. We are going to do a quick Q&A if you all wouldn't mind hanging out. Before we get to that, I did want to thank our sponsors for putting together, again, this wonderful, I don't mean to say this, you guys were and are amazing, and just really appreciate your time. Again, just want to thank Good Time, for people that don't know, is the industry leading interview scheduling software out there. Lever, also a great sponsor and partner, scalable ATS and CRM solutions, and Crosscheck as well, which provides automated reference checking, talent sourcing, and quality of hire analytics. We're going to launch a quick poll before we dive into the Q&A. If anybody in the audience wants to learn more about any of those companies, any of those groups, please let us know, and we'd be happy to reach out. One other thing, I saw quite a few questions going into chat. If you wouldn't mind throwing that into the Q&A screen or Q&A app, we'll get to them there. So first question is about incentivization of recruiting. Do you incentivize recruiters to bring in diverse candidates? Ron, why don't you start us off there?
Sure. No, we don't incentivize folks, but we want that to be a core function that they do. And so it's more an assessment. It's not an incentive. It's just, that's the normal course of business. You should be thinking that way, and that should be your focus point.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
Can I touch on this and then touch on to another question that's with this, that will go with this. I think number one, people don't really understand the definition of diversity. So the definition of diversity is the unique characteristics that represent us all. Okay. And so everyone on this call is diverse. That is just actually true. A lot of times we think of diversity as an us versus them, and the them is like a straight white male. But even the straight white male, when you dig deeper beyond the surface, has characteristics of diversity. What we're talking about is visual diversity in our workforces. That's really what we're talking about. So the reason why I would not associate a, I don't know, what'd you say, like bonus or commission? For like hiring candidates is because I don't use that term diverse candidates, because we're all diverse. You're hiring a human being. Like humans,
Absolutely.
We're humans. We're not
Absolutely.
diverse candidates. We're humans. I'm not a diverse candidate. I just identify as Black, and this is my one of my visual diversity characteristics. So that's kind of, why I wanted to bring that out, because I think that we just need to make sure we're saying the right things from that standpoint. And so that's kind of my thoughts as to why I wouldn't compensate for that. Similar to Ron, maybe have that it's your core function to bring in human beings who are skilled and qualified. You know what I'm saying? So that's my point.
And who can identify diversity, right? Like, as you're speaking to, like, that's a primary goal of a great recruiter or talent acquisition leader. They're able to identify what the different characteristics are of any human or hire.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that we shouldn't have targets towards visual diversity. So for example, if your company currently only has 2% people that identify as Asian, and you want to ensure you're increasing that population because your local community is 10%, that I understand that makes sense, right? But for us to just say that, here's a diverse candidate versus what? Another person? No, we're all humans.
Right. Well said. Absolutely. Very well said. Speaking of that, though, we got a question. Could you speak to different dimensions of diversity beyond age, race, gender? How do you promote? I got a little pop-up in my way. How do you promote and quantify data for cognitive diversity or diversity of thought? Anybody want to jump in on that one?
I mean, that's a great question. I mean, I think that is the holy grail that we're all trying to get: the diversity of thought, the diversity of how we do things, and the diversity of our experiences. How do we capture that from an analytics standpoint? To be honest, we don't right now. We don't capture. The only way we capture is by we have, suggestions or idea box where people can put through their thoughts. But other than that, we're not really analyzing or tracking that.
Yeah. That's a really interesting question. It wasn't the first one or next in order, but I just thought it was so interesting because to Dean's point, it's not only about the way we look, but it's about who we are, and there's got to be room for everybody. To the person that asked the question, I don't know if we're going to come to a good answer today, but it does bring up a lot of questions. And again, as you think about kind of the nuanced and longer term approach to what a diversity program means, that has to be a consideration and something that we as an industry and people leaders have to tackle. But again, I don't know if we're going to get a good answer today.
Yeah, my quick thoughts on this, Chris, is this is a very this is actually a question we could do a session on. It's really nuanced because,
Right.
For example, psychological testing is designed to capture cognitive thinking, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the argument is in the diversity space is who's creating these testing, and is this testing relevant for different identity groups, right? And so, will you capture accurate data, right, cognitively, if you're serving a group of African Americans versus Caribbean, right, Black, right, based upon who's creating this information. So I think that IQ testing is trying to do this. Psychological testing is trying to do this. Simulations are trying to quantify this type of data. It's really nuanced. There'd be so many different points that you'd have to think about to really quantify. I guess my only question, and this would be my question to Randeep, who asked this, my question is, what's the problem you're trying to solve by getting this information? That is what I'd want to know. What are you trying to solve or resolve? And when we can start from that point, then I think we'd have a greater discussion around it.
Absolutely. And I think we have our next topic of discussion, Dean. So another interesting question, and it's about how to take that first step. And really more to the point, what's the recommendation for DEI leaders to introduce the concept of creating a DEI strategy from scratch? And again, more to the point, how do you do it that in a way that isn't intimidating or doesn't elicit a defensive posture? Have any of you ever kind of come up against that where, somebody or you want to take that first step and you're getting pushback, and how did you overcome it if you've ever experienced it?
It's a hard question. I'll try and tackle it. I would say not at where I'm at, but at a previous place where I worked, diversity was important, because people say it's important. However, the way that just the racial and ethnic diversity was, we weren't making progress on that. And so I think it's, that's where it's like qualitative and quantitative information. And you have to have that leadership buy-in in order to really make progress, even though I think your strategy comes, from both sides. If you don't have leadership buy-in or hiring manager buy-in, let's just say, then it's very difficult to make sure that you're doing it right. So I think that from a strategy perspective, that's where whoever is working on your strategy needs to understand all of those nuances and make sure that there's alignment in, on the strategy, and that it is really important. Like asking a really hard question, like what's more important, getting the person hired or, getting, an underrepresented group person hired.
Yeah.
And so I think that those are really tough questions, and looking at the entire picture is not for it's not for a beginner, right? So you really need to work collaboratively with your teams to get that strategy enacted.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We've got about 15 more questions to go, but we are at time. I know everybody has a lot to do, including our audience. But again, I just want to say thank you to everybody. Thank you, Dean. Thank you, Ron. Thank you, Jen, for participating. And thank you to everybody in attendance for, really participating and, allowing us to talk about this very important topic. And like I say, the two key takeaways for me is, one, there's a heck of a lot more work to be done. And two, thank goodness I work in data, because there seems to always be a place for me when it comes to diversity programs. So really appreciate it. Thank you all, and
Thanks for
have
having
a
us.
great day.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.